So in this module, we're going to build this stopwatch application. So you can see it has this nice card-like structure that has green background and then this dark green card. And you can see the start button has this particular animation. Whenever I hover over this particular start button, the rest of the button doesn't have this animation. I have added the animation only for the start button. So when I click on the start button, then once it's complete the 100 milliseconds, then it is going to update the seconds span element, which is the HTML element. And if I click on stop, then you can see it's actually stopped the timer. And if I click on reset, then it's going to reset the entire thing to 0. And if I again want to start it, then simply click on start. If I stop it, and if I again click on start, then it's going to resume the timer from where it is actually stopped. If I again click on stop, and if I again click on start, then you can see it's actually going to resume the timer from where it is actually stopped. So this will be the application that we will develop in this entire module. So in the next part, we're going to start with the HTML part of the project, which is the stopwatch application. Now it's time to start with the HTML part of the project. So for that, I have already created the required file inside the Visual Studio Code, which is the style.css, script.js. These two files are linked with the index.html. On all of these three files are stored in the same directory. And I have also launched the final version of the application, that is this one that we want to develop, and also the version of the application that we want to develop in this module, that is the stopwatch application. So the first thing is we actually need to create the container, that is this particular container, which is this one, and instead of that we will add the particular heading, then these two elements, which is the span element, and then we need to place these particular buttons. So coming back to the our version of the application, and inside of the index.html, the first thing is we need to create the container, and here I press the tab key so that it will automatically complete the code for us. And instead of that, first I'm going to place the h1 element, and here I will be name the heading as stopwatch, that is this one. Now you can see the stopwatch is now visible to the browser. Then here we need to create the class, which is time, that is a division element. Inside of that we will add the span element. The first one is for the seconds, so we want to display here 00, and then we need to define the class that is going to be seconds. And similarly we need for the milliseconds one, so I'm going to duplicate it into one more time, and here I will be add the class name as milli, which is short for the milliseconds. Okay, and after that we need to create the another division, which is for the button container. So here I'm going to use the button container. Press the tab key, then you can see we get the button container class division. Instead of that we need to place the three buttons. So first we need to place the button, and the class of this particular button is going to be start, and here we want to display the label, means the text that we want to display inside the button, which is start. Then I'm going to duplicate into two more times, and here I will be use the stop, and then the text that I want to display to the button is stop, and here I need to display the reset, and the text that I want to display is actually reset. Then you can see now we get the stopwatch heading, the timer elements in which the timer will be displayed, which is the span elements, and then we have these three buttons, which is the required things for the HTML part for this particular stopwatch application. So in the next part we're going to start with the CSS of the project. Now it's time to start with the CSS part of the project. So for that we need to use the style.css file. Instead of that, first we need to select the body selector. So inside of the body selector, first I need to set here box size into border box, and then we need to reset the margin to 0. Then the padding is also going to be 0. And after that we need to select the body selector. Inside of the body, first we need to reset the display. So the reset means first we need to set the display, not reset. So display is going to flex. Then we need to use the align items, which is going to be center. Then justify content, which is also going to be center. And then we need to provide the min height, which is going to be 100 VH, which will basically shift the content to the center of the screen. And then we need to provide the minimum width. So minimum width is going to lie, min width is going to lie 100 BW. Okay, and then after that we need to provide the text alignment to the center. So everything will be centered to the container. Okay, means inside the body. And after that, we need to provide here a font family. So font family, we are going to here use the monospace. Control save it. Now you can see the font of the entire project is changed. Now here I will be using the background, and then I actually want to use here a linear gradient function. So here I will be using the linear gradient, and then here the first thing is going to provide the to right, and then the color code that we want those. So it is like 7E D, then 56F, and then I'm going to provide here a comma, and then in the other color, which is hash symbol 28, then B485. So you can see now we get this nice green color. Okay, so this will be the color that will be used for the project, and then we need to change the color which is for the font. So it is going to be like a pure white color. I will save it. Now you can see the color is actually changed to white. So after that, we need to set the code for the container. So it is a class selector. So we need to use the dot, then the name of the selector. So it is like container. Then to start its block of the code. And instead of that, first we need to set the display. So display is going to be like flex. So once I did that, now you can see everything is actually arranged as the single row. Then we need to define the flex direction, which is going to be column. If I control save it, now you can see everything will be arranged in a column like structure. Then we need to use the align items, which is going to be center. Okay, and after that we need to here provide the padding. So padding is going to be like 2 RAM units, and after that we need to add here a background. So background I will be using here a RGBA function, that is this one, and then here I will be using 0 0 0, and then the alpha is going to be 0.6. Now I can see we get this particular green color with the use of the background RGBA, and then we need to use the border radius to 10 pixel, and then after that I will be using here a box shadow, which is going to be like 0 pixel, then the blurriness is going to be 20 pixel, then the RGBA value, which is going to be here 0.5. Control save it. Now we can see we get this kind of effect, that is this one, and now we have this particular one also. The thing that this align item is doesn't require, but the next thing is we want to set is the h1 element. So after the end of the container, here we need to specify the h1 element. Instead of the h1 element, first I need to increase the font size, which is going to be 4 RAM. Now you can see the size of the font is actually increased for the h1 element. Then we need to provide here a margin bottom property. So from bottom we need to provide a RAM, which is 1 RAM, and after that we need to select the time. So if I come back to the index.html, first I need to set the view to word wrap, that is this particular view and word wrap, and then if I come back to index.html, so this will be the time division. So we are going to provide the style code for these two span elements. So here I'm going to select the time, and after the h1 element I'm going to here specify the time. Inside of the time, first I'm going to change the font size to 3 RAM units. Then you can see the size of these two span elements is actually changed. Okay, and after that I'm going to use here a background. So background, again I will be using here RGBA function, RGBA, and then the alpha value is going to be 0.6. If I control save it, now you can see we get this kind of effect for this particular background. Okay, for the division element time, then you need to provide the padding. So padding is not going to be auto, we need to provide the padding, so it is like 0.5 RAM units, and after that we need to provide here 1 RAM unit. So from top and bottom it is going to 0.5, and from left and right it is going to 1 RAM unit. And after that we need to provide the border radius. So border radius is going to be 50 pixel. You can see we get this capsule like structure. Then we need to provide the margin bottom property. So margin bottom is going to be like 1.5 RAM unit, so that there is a space between the buttons and the time division. And after that we need to use the box shadow property, that is this one, and here I will be again using the 5 pixel, not 4, it is like 5 pixel, then 5 pixel, then the blurriness is going to 15 pixel, and then we need to use the RGBA value, and here we need to provide the 0.2. Control save it. Now you can see we get this box shadow to the time division. After that we need to provide the code for this button container that has these 3 buttons, which is start, stop, and reset, that is this button container. So I'm going to copy the name of the button container, coming back to the style.css again. Here I'm going to first specify the dot operator, then the name of the button container, and inside of that first we want to set the display to flex, and then we need to provide the gap. So gap is going to be like 1 rem unit. You can see it is actually shifted to the left side of the container. So now it's time to specify the code for the buttons. So now we will do what? First, here we need to select the classes. So first I'm going to select here a button. So button dot start, and also we need to here use the button dot stop. Then again I'm going to select here a button dot reset. Then to start its block of the code, what I'm going to do, I'm going to take them into the one single lines after the comma, and here instead of that, first we need to add the code, which is border is going to none. Okay, and then we need to set the outline to none as well. Okay, and after that we need to specify the padding. So padding is going to be like 1 rem from top and bottom, then 2 rem from left and right. And after that we need to provide the font size. So font size is going to be like 2 rem units. And then we need to provide the border radius, which is going to be like 5 pixel. Then we need to provide the cursor to pointer, and then we need to provide here a color to has symbol 3 times F. Now you can see the style of the buttons is now changed, and here we need to also provide transition. So transition is going to be like background, and then here we need to provide 0.3s. Then we need to use here a transform, which is going to be like 0.2s. And then we need to provide the width. So width is going to be like as needed. So here I will be using the 150 pixel. If I control save it, now you can see width of the button is changed. If you want more width, then you can use 250, which will increase the width a lot, but I will be using 150. Okay, so you can see now the width of the button is changed. Also we need to here use the bounce animation, because right now we need to create the keyframes for the bounce animation, which is will be applied to the start button only. So here I will be using the keyframe identifier. So identifier I'm going to specify here bounce. Then we need a 0% version of the, so first we need to specify the 0%, then we need to specify the 150%. Okay, and then we need to also provide the here 100%. Okay, and the first thing is we need to provide here a transform property. So transform, it is going to be like translate on y-axis, which is going to be 0. Then here we want to again use the transform, then translate into y-axis, which is going to be minus 10 pixel. Control save it. Now we have created the keyframes for the bounce animation. Next time to specify the colors to these particular buttons. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to here select the button dot start, and here we will use the background color, which is going to be like hash symbol 28B485. So this will be the color used for the button, which is the green version of the color. And I'm going to copy it into one more time, again one more time. Then here I will be changed to stop, and this one is for reset. And then I'm going to change the color code from here, which is going to be like FF6A88. So this will be the color for the stop button, and here we need to change the color again. It is going to be like FF9A8B. This will be the color code for the reset button. Now it's time to apply the bounce animation to the start button. So here we need to select the start. So start, and also I'm going to apply the hover alongside. So we need to provide the animation. So on hover we need to perform the bounce animation. Bounce animation with the time duration of 0.5s. If I control save it, now if I hover over the button, then you can see it's having a bounce animation similar to this one, similar to the final version of the application, that is this one. Now there's a one problem. You can see the final version of the application has this particular capsule like structure, whereas the other version of the application has this particular structure. Now to fix that particular issue, inside the container I have actually removed the property which is actually a align items property. So that is this one, align items. So if I specify the center, then you can see it's going to shrink the container size, which is actually the container size for the timer division. Alright, now it's actually looks like the same with the final version of the application. The only thing is left. Now it's time to start the code for these particular button functionalities. So which is our next step that we're going to do in the JavaScript part of the project, which is the stopwatch application. So now we are going to start with the JavaScript part of the project, which is the stopwatch timer application. So for that we need to use the script.js file. Now the first thing is we need to actually create an event. Instead of that, we are going to get the reference of all of these particular elements. So I'm going to actually zoom in a little bit so that you can see everything more clearly. So here first thing is I'm going to here type the window and then onload event. So we are going to use the onload event of the HTML document wins window. So when the entire HTML page loaded, then we want to call an anonymous function. So I'm going to use a little different approach than the previous projects that we have developed in this course, right? And the next thing is we need to actually create the variables. So the first variable that we need is actually the milliseconds, and the second variable that is required is for the seconds. And also you can see here there is no colon present, just like in the final version of the application we have. So if I come back to the index.html here, and here I just need to simply place the colon. If I control save it, now you can see we get the colon that actually create the differentiation between these two elements. That is actually this one is for the milliseconds and this one is for the seconds. Okay, now coming back to the script.js file again. So the first variable that we need is actually the seconds variable. So this is going to be equal to 0. And then the other variable that we need is actually the milliseconds variable. Now why I have actually used here let keyword, the reason for that, the values of these two variables will be updated multiple times. So if I create the variables by using the const, then we can't actually reinitialize those variables. That is the reason we need to use here let. Now the next variable that we need is actually the interval variable. So again here I will be using the interval variable. Now this variable will be initialized nothing. So this particular variable will be responsible for updating the values of these stopwatch application, like whether you want to start, stop and reset. All of these things will be done or achieved by using the updation of this particular variable value. Alright, now we need to create a couple of constants for the start button, stop and reset button, and also we need to create the constant for these two elements, because these will be used to update these values of these two HTML elements, which is our seconds and the milliseconds. So here I'm going to use the const, and then I need to here use the add seconds, which is the name of the UI element that I want to do it. So here I will be using the document dot query selector. So because inside of my index.html, if I actually come back to the index.html here, you can see I have not used any IDs. So that is the reason I am actually using here query selector, because I need to specify the type of the selector. So it is actually used to actually select the single selector from the HTML elements. So right now I want to select the seconds one, that is this particular one. So here I am actually going to use the class name. So the class name is seconds, and here the class name is milli, which is short for the milliseconds. So I'm going to here specify the inside the double quotes, I'm going to specify the seconds. Alright, and then I'm going to duplicate it into one more time, and here I will be replacing it with the milliseconds. Or I can just simply say here add milliseconds. So this will be used for the milliseconds. Okay, and then here I need to specify the class name, which is mili. If I come back to the index.html, so it is actually a double li. Okay, so now we have actually get the reference to these two elements. Next we need to get the reference of the buttons. So here we need to use the const again. So const, the first is actually the start button, and then we need to again use the document.query selector, because we want to specify the type of the selector. Instead of that, the class name that I have specified to the start button is actually the start, stop and reset. So we need to just simply provide here a start. So I'm going to here use the dot, because it is a class selector, so we need to specify the dot as well, start, and then I'm going to duplicate into two more times. So this one is for the stop button. I'm going to first remove it, not small, not capital one, I want a smaller one, which is camel case typing, stop button, and this one is for our reset button, which is short for the reset btn. And then here we need to specify the stop, and then we need to specify the reset. So the next step is we need to add the listener to all of these buttons. because now we have get the reference to all of these UI elements. So it's time to set the listener. So in order to add the listener, I will be here using a different approach. So the first thing is I will be here using the start. So this will be our start btn, and I'm just going to directly add here on click, which is this on click, and it's going to be equal to an anonymous function, and then I will be specifying the body of this particular function. So this will be the approach that I will be used for this particular application. It is a little different than the previous application that we have developed so far. And then I'm going to duplicate it into 2 more times, and here I will be replacing it with the stop btn, that is this one way, and here I will be again using the different one, which is the reset btn. So on click of the start button, we want to perform the stopwatch timer updation code. So inside of that, so first we need to here call the clear interval. So here this is the clear interval function, that is a JavaScript pre-built function will be used. Instead of that, I'm going to actually clear the current interval, that is this particular variable. So we need to first clear the interval so that we can start it from fresh, and also this particular line of the code will take care of any previous interval will be cleared. Means it's going to clear the previous interval and going to start the interval, which is the timer, again from the start. Okay, and then we need to initialize the interval variable to a set interval, which is a JavaScript function. So here we need to specify 2 arguments. The first one is the function that we want to call. So here I will be calling a start callback. Now the second is the time, which is going to be 10 seconds. So what this particular means is actually after every 10 seconds, this particular function will be called. So we need to actually create this start function. Okay. So this particular line of the code does what? Set interval, it's going to call the start function after every 10 milliseconds. So that is the reason we have actually used here set interval function, and we have initialized it with the interval. And inside of the stop btn, we need to simply call here a clear interval function, and we need to pass the interval. Okay, and the similar thing we need to done inside the reset function button, that is this one, which is a reset button click. We also need to simply clear the interval, and then we need to actually update the values of the variables also. So we need to set the seconds to 0, then we need to set the milliseconds to 0 as well. So after setting the values of the seconds and milliseconds variable to 0, then we need to set the values of these HTML elements to 0 as well. Right now by default it is actually 0, but once we start the timer and stop it, and once we click on the reset, then you can see these HTML elements is also updated to 0. So to do that, we need to here use the add seconds, which is the variable used for displaying this HTML element. We need to update its inner HTML to a string variable, which is actually 00. You can see it here, 00. And similarly, we need to update it with the milliseconds also. So milliseconds internal HTML to 0 also. So that marks the completion of the code for the stop and the reset button. So I'm going to actually collapse it so that we can see the code more clearly, so that we can focus on the start function code. So now we need to actually create this particular start function. So here I will be using the function keyword. Then we need to here name the start, then we need to start its round brackets, and then we need to start its block of the body. Now inside of the, once we click on the start, we need to update the value of the milliseconds variable. So this will be the milliseconds variable, and also this seconds variable. So here first we need to increment the value of the milliseconds variable, not add millisecond, it's just a millisecond, that is this one, milliseconds. So we are going to increment it after every 10 seconds. So we need to actually increment the value of the milliseconds. Once we increment the value of the milliseconds, we need to actually display the timer in form of like this particular structure. Like right now we need to add some conditions. So first I'm going to type the code, then I will be explain you what I want to say here. So instead of that, first we need to check the value of the milliseconds. If it is smaller than 10, then what we want to do here, we actually want to add the milliseconds element, which is actually used to display the value of this one, which is actually indicating this HTML element, this add millisecond. If you actually see at the top, you can see here. So it is actually used to indicate this particular HTML element. So we want to update its inner HTML. So inner HTML. So here we need to append the 0, and then also we need to concatenate with the value of the milliseconds variable. So why I'm actually adding the 0? If I didn't specify the 0, then this particular will just only going to show a single digit, which will just basically don't follow the structure of the stopwatch application. So in order to achieve this, we need to add a 0 explicitly to the milliseconds variable on the basis of this particular condition. And if the value is actually greater than 10, then we want to perform the else condition. That is actually very simple. We just need to simply update the inner HTML of the add milliseconds, and then we just need to remove the explicit 0 string. Alright, so this will take care of the first condition. So if I just simply control save it, and if I click on start, then you can see now the timer is actually started and it's actually updated infinitely. So if I click on stop, then you can see the timer is actually stopped. If I again started, now you can see the millisecond timer is actually started. If I click on reset, now the things will be set it to 0. So our milliseconds part is actually working perfectly fine. Now here, there is a one approach I want to tell you, means the logic. So 1 second is actually equals to 1000 milliseconds. Okay, so if I write here short for ms, so I need to actually wait for 1000 milliseconds, then this particular will be updated. But I want to say here, once the 1000 millisecond set gets completed, then we want to update the value of the seconds variable. But for the completion of the tutorial, I'm going to use a different approach here, means the simple approach. 1 second I will be using here to just only 100 milliseconds, so that the tutorial can be gets completed very quickly or easily. But if you are actually building this application for your assignment purpose, then use this approach, which I just going to explain after typing the code. Alright, so after this we need to check here another if condition. So if the seconds, which is the milliseconds, because there is a time when the milliseconds variable gets complete these 1000 milliseconds. Okay, but I'm actually going to check for the 100 milliseconds only. So if milliseconds is actually greater than 99, okay, so if it is greater than 99, then we want to update the value of the seconds variable. So after 100 millisecond sets gets completed, then we want to update the value of the seconds variable to 1. Okay, and similar thing we need to do it here, just like we have done here. We have to check for the condition. So if it is not a single digit value, then we want to update the value directly. If it is smaller than 10, means a single digit value, then we need to explicitly add a 0 in front of the milliseconds variable value. So similar thing we need to do it here, but I'm going to use here a different approach, which is a ternary operator approach. So here I will be using the add seconds, which is actually used to denote this particular HTML element. So add seconds, and then here we need to update its inner HTML. So inner HTML is equal to, and then here I need to use the seconds. So if it is smaller than 10, again a similar condition I am using here, smaller than 10, then we want to add a 0, which is a string 0. Okay, here we need to add a 0, and then also we need to add the value of the seconds variable. So if it is not a case, means the value is not smaller than 10, then we need to simply display the value of the seconds variable. So this single condition actually doing the same thing here. So here I have used a if else condition, and here for the seconds purpose I have used a ternary operator approach, which is actually used to work with the 3 operands. Okay, so I hope this logic is clear to you. The next thing is, after completing the 100 milliseconds target, means a 100 millisecond set gets completed, we want to again restart the milliseconds to 0. So to do that, we need to set the milliseconds variable value to 0 again, so that we can start the another set of the 100 milliseconds again. But in the real world application, if you are actually submitting an assignment or building this project for real purpose, then use the 1000 milliseconds. Okay, I'm just going to give you the example also for the 1000 millisecond once we complete the entire code. Okay, so now once we set the milliseconds to 0, then we also need to update its HTML element, which is this one. Okay, so we need to here do what? we need to simply call the add milliseconds, which is actually used to denote this particular HTML element. Again, I'm repeating. So we need to update its inner HTML, and then we need to set it to 0, and then need to terminate it, which is totally optional. So if I control save it, and now if I run the application, you can see now after 100 milliseconds, the timer gets updated, which is the seconds. If I click on stop, now you can see the time is get stopped. If I click on start, you can see now the timer is again started. Now if I click on reset, now the timer gets reset to 0. Now if I use here 1000 milliseconds one, that is 999, which is actually used to check for the 1000 milliseconds value. So if I click on it, then you can see it's going to wait for the 1000 milliseconds. That is the reason I have used for the 100 milliseconds. So once 1000 milliseconds gets completed, then it's going to update the value of the seconds variable. Again, the set of the 1000 milliseconds gets completed, then it's going to update the value of the seconds to variable to 2 seconds, which is the HTML element. So you can see it's actually working fine. But for the completion of the tutorial, I have used here a 99 value so that the timer and the seconds variable value updated quickly. So now the entire code for the stopwatch timer application gets completed, which is the stop button, the reset button, all the code is now completed. So if you have any queries, you can actually ask in the Q&A section. And if you like this entire module, then leave your review, because your review helps me and motivates me to create more awesome content like this for you. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next lecture. Thank you very much.